Now you finally feel what silence does.
Did she just pour coffee on the billionaire CEO on live TV? The entire ballroom fell silent. Cameras stopped panning, waiters froze mid-step, and every phone in the room lifted like a sea of digital eyes. But Amara Young stood there, shoulders back, hands steady, not a trace of regret on her face. A black waitress in a crisp white shirt and fitted black vest, she looked Ethan Caldwell straight in the eyes as the coffee soaked into his $1,000 suit. She didn't flinch, she didn't apologize. And the world just watched. This isn't just another scandal. This is a black story that had been boiling beneath the surface for years. And the moment that coffee hit his chest, it all began to unravel fast. You're watching Hidden Worth, the channel that reveals the value buried beneath injustice, silence, and forgotten truths. Now, let's be clear, this wasn't a clumsy accident. Amara wasn't some angry employee having a breakdown. No, this moment was calculated, it was necessary, and it was decades in the making. Who was Amara Young? To most, just another face in the service crew. But behind that radiant smile and calm demeanor was a storm, a lifetime of microaggressions, whispered insults, and being treated like decoration in rooms filled with white men in power. What the public didn't know was this: the man she humiliated on national television had a direct link to the death of her sister. She didn't do it for attention, she did it for closure. In the next few minutes, we'll peel back the layers of a story so raw, so painful, it will change how you see silence, privilege, and the true cost of not speaking up. So don't scroll, don't blink. What you're about to hear isn't just about spilled coffee. It's about justice brewed hot and served right back to power. This is Hidden Worth, and it's time you knew why that billionaire froze. Amara Young was the kind of woman people remembered without realizing why. She didn't command attention with noise or dramatics. She simply existed with a quiet presence that lingered. Her skin, a smooth, rich brown, glowed under the soft lights of hotel ballrooms. Her uniform was always spotless, her posture graceful but firm. And when she smiled, it was the kind of smile that made people look twice, not because she was flirting, not because she wanted anything, but because it felt real, like warmth in a cold room. She was 24 years old, born and raised in South Dallas, in a neighborhood the city liked to ignore, the kind of place where streetlights flickered more often than they shined, and public buses were a lifeline. She'd grown up fast, too fast. Her mother worked 2 jobs, and her older sister, Rhea, was both protector and teacher. After Rhea died, Amara didn't talk much about the pain. She channeled it into working first, cleaning offices, then serving at events, and eventually landing at Crown Hospitality, a premium service company that staffed high-profile galas. It was through this job that she learned the rules of invisible existence. Rule 1, always smile, no matter what is said to you. Rule 2, don't make eye contact with the guests unless they initiate it. Rule 3, never speak unless spoken to. But Amara had her own rule, one she never told anyone. Rule 4, watch everything, remember everything. Because the truth is, Amara wasn't just working to survive, she was collecting pieces of power, of silence, of guilt. She'd worked hundreds of events, seen men get too handsy and women pretend not to notice, heard executives whisper things they'd never say in public jokes about diversity hires, or how urban girls clean better when they're grateful. She learned that the higher the status, the lower the mask had to slip for a moment of honesty, and it was in those moments that Amara began to see how deep the rot really ran. Yet, she kept showing up, always early, always prepared, because while they thought she was just another waitress blending into the backdrop, she was paying attention, waiting. And the day she served coffee to Ethan Caldwell wasn't a coincidence. It was her moment. And for the first time, they were going to see her, not just her skin, or her smile, or her silence, but her strength. Because Amara Young wasn't just here to serve. She was here to be seen. Before Amara ever set foot in a ballroom, before she even knew the name Ethan Caldwell, there was Rhea. Rhea Young was the kind of woman who didn't ask for change, she demanded it. 5 years older than Amara, Rhea was bold where Amara was quiet, fire where Amara was calm. She marched at protests, organized community events, and studied criminal justice with dreams of becoming a civil rights attorney. In their neighborhood, she was known as the girl with the megaphone and the heart too big for her own safety. To Amara, she was more than a sister, she was a compass. Every lesson, every warning, every bedtime story Ria told was shaped by the reality of what it meant to be black, female, and unprotected in America. Then, one night, everything changed. Ria was on her way home from a city council meeting, driving a borrowed car along Interstate 45. It was late, raining hard. According to the report, a black SUV clipped her from behind, forcing her off the road. Her car hit a guardrail and flipped twice. She died on the scene. The police ruled it an accident, hit and run. Driver unknown, no witnesses, case closed. But Amara knew her sister, and she knew when something didn't add up. A week later, a neighbor mentioned seeing a vehicle matching the description, a black corporate SUV at the same location hours before the crash. Digging through public records, Amara found that a logistics company called Corvax Transport had a fleet of such SUVs. Corvax Transport was a wholly owned subsidiary of Caldwell Holdings, the same corporate empire Ethan Caldwell had inherited after his father's passing. She tried to get answers, emails, calls, even a letter to the company's compliance office. Nothing. No apology, no investigation, just silence. That silence was louder than any denial. And in that silence, a seed of resolve took root in Amara. She didn't have money, power, or a voice the world wanted to hear, but she had something just as strong: memory. Every tray she carried, every door she opened, every fake smile she gave at events sponsored by people like Caldwell, it was all building toward something. And when she was finally assigned to serve at the company's flagship celebration, the very same company she believed had buried her sister's truth, Amara didn't hesitate. She took the job. Not to serve, but to speak in the only language people like Ethan couldn't ignore: pain. The event was everything you'd expect from a billionaire's celebration: elegant chandeliers, live jazz, endless champagne, and a guest list filled with the kind of people who smiled wide for cameras but whispered when they thought no one was listening. Amara moved through the crowd like she always did, graceful, quiet, invisible. Her tray balanced perfectly, her uniform crisp, her smile fixed like armor. But that night, the words cut deeper than usual. As she passed a group of senior executives from Caldwell Holdings, one of them nudged the other and said under his breath, "Now that's a mocha masterpiece." Another chuckled, "She's got that Beyoncé body but the Starbucks paycheck." Amara kept walking. She'd learned how to swallow disgust, how to keep her eyes forward and her hands steady, but she felt her heartbeat shift. Later, a man in a navy suit leaned toward her as she poured his wine. "Tell me, do they train y'all to walk like that, or is it just natural rhythm?" His friends laughed. She didn't flinch. At the dessert table, two women in evening gowns whispered loudly enough for her to hear. "They really let anyone serve here now, huh?" "They call it inclusion," the other replied with a smirk. "I call it aesthetic." And through it all, Ethan Caldwell stood nearby, champagne in hand, polished smile, perfectly tailored tux. He glanced her way once. Their eyes met. Then he looked away. That moment stung more than the words. Because he saw her. He heard them. And he chose silence. It wasn't just the comments. It was the fact that no one ever spoke up. Not the guests, not the organizers, not even the other staff, who had learned long ago that defending someone like Amara only made you a target too. It was the way her body was allowed to be admired, but her humanity ignored. The way her smile was welcome, but her pain was not. And the way her presence could be a joke to the same people who would later give speeches about diversity and equity. By the time the keynote began, Amara wasn't just hurt. She was burning, not with rage, but with something colder: clarity. This wasn't about one night. This was about every room she had ever walked into and been made to feel less. And she was done being their background. The ballroom had dimmed for the keynote speech. Spotlights framed the stage where Ethan Caldwell stood, thanking his board, praising his late father, and speaking of legacy. Amara stood near the back, her tray nearly empty, her body still. Her mind, though, was anything but calm. Her ears buzzed with every insult she had endured that night, every smirk, every backhanded compliment dressed as charm. And every time her eyes scanned the crowd, she saw Ethan laughing, clapping, basking in praise from people who viewed her like set decoration. Then came the moment. She was refilling glasses near the front when a senior executive, Harold Branson, placed a firm hand on her lower back. She stiffened. His hand lingered a beat too long. Then he leaned close, breath thick with scotch, and whispered, "You know, you'd make one hell of a bonus if Caldwell ever got tired of spreadsheets." Laughter. Not just from Harold, but from the other men around him. And then, from Ethan. Not loud, just a smirk, a chuckle. But Amara saw it. That was it. Her hands tightened around the coffee pot. Her vision tunneled. She wasn't in a ballroom anymore. She was back on the sidewalk outside the morgue, holding her mother's hand while they identified Rhea. Back in her tiny apartment, reading the email that told her Rhea's case was closed. Back at her first event, when a guest called her cute for a dark-skinned girl, and the manager said to let it slide. Slide. Everything was always supposed to slide. Not tonight. She turned, walked directly toward the stage, past two stunned security guards too shocked to stop her. Her black shoes tapped calmly against the marble floor. Ethan was mid-sentence when he noticed her. She paused just a few feet from him. The entire room turned. Without breaking eye contact, Amara raised the coffee pot and poured. A full stream of piping hot, bitter brew splashed across Ethan's shirt and down his tailored jacket. The gasp from the crowd was instant. Glasses clinked, phones rose. Someone screamed. But Amara didn't move. She didn't blink. And Ethan didn't react. Not right away. He stood there, frozen, soaked, staring at her like he'd seen a ghost. She looked at him with an expression not of rage but of truth, as if to say, "Now you feel it, a fraction of what I've carried." Then, without a word, she set the pot on the podium and walked away. For a long second, no one moved. The ballroom, once buzzing with clinking glasses and orchestrated laughter, had gone completely still. All that could be heard was the distant hum of the microphone Ethan had dropped. Amara's footsteps echoed softly as she walked away from the stage, her back straight, her pace steady. No one stopped her. Not yet. Every eye followed her like a slow wave, a mixture of confusion, horror, curiosity, and something else, respect. The coffee had soaked into Ethan's shirt and suit jacket, a dark stain spreading down his chest like an accusation. It steamed slightly in the cool air of the room, but he didn't flinch. He didn't wipe it off. He didn't shout. He just stood there. Still. Frozen. Like something had just been unlocked. A security guard finally broke the silence, stepping toward Amara with a stiff hand on his earpiece. But Ethan raised his palm just a few inches and said clearly, "Let her go." It wasn't a request, it was a command. Everyone turned to look at him. His voice cracked slightly, but his face stayed unreadable. Nobody touches her. Amara had already reached the edge of the ballroom, passing a cluster of servers who looked at her like she had just done something mythic. Ethan stared at the exit long after she disappeared behind the double doors. His mind was no longer in that room. He wasn't thinking about the investors, the speech, the PR fallout, or the dry cleaning bill. He was thinking about a name he hadn't heard in years. Rhea Young. The moment her face flashed in his memory, his breath caught in his throat. He remembered the old internal memo, something about a car accident, a compliance file, a driver from one of the subsidiaries. At the time, he hadn't paid attention. Why would he? It had been buried under a dozen other reports. Tragedies like that happened all the time. But now it wasn't a statistic. It had a face. And a sister. He reached for the microphone but stopped himself. What was there to say? That he had let it happen? That he had ignored it? That the smile he wore while others insulted her had been more damaging than words? The damage had already been done. And Amara's silence, her stillness, had said everything. Because sometimes the loudest scream doesn't come from raised voices. It comes from quiet defiance. That night, Ethan didn't sleep. Not because of the coffee, not because of the headlines that had already begun spinning their versions of the story, not even because of the angry board members blowing up his phone. It was her face, Amara's face. Her eyes, the way she had looked at him unblinking, not hateful, just honest. He knew that look. It wasn't rage, it was recognition. It was someone silently telling him, "You already know why." And deep down, he did. By midnight, he was in his home office, the city lights of Dallas glowing behind him. He pulled up the company's internal archive system and started typing, Rhea Young, incident, Corvax transport, year 2017. At first, nothing came up. But Ethan knew how this worked. Sometimes, silence meant someone had buried it. He kept digging, searching through old compliance logs, internal reports, flagged files. Then, at 2:17 a.m., he found it. Incident report number A734TX, non-fatal vehicle collision, escalated to fatality. The file was labeled internal only, last accessed by legal, then closed. The summary was short. Company vehicle, operated by employee Marcus Hale, collided with another vehicle off Interstate 45 during non-business hours. Victim, Rhea Young. Fatal injuries. Employee placed on administrative leave, resigned shortly after. No charges filed. That was it. No mention of investigation, no audit, no outreach to the victim's family. Ethan leaned back in his chair, stunned by how easily something like this had been pushed aside. A woman had died. Her sister had lived with the silence. And his company had erased it with a few sentences. He pulled up Marcus Hale's profile. The man had vanished after 2017. No forwarding address, no further employment. It was like the system had swallowed him whole. Ethan knew what this meant. Corvax Transport had buried the story. And whether by design or indifference, he had let it happen. He closed his laptop, leaned forward, and placed his head in his hands. For the first time in his career, Ethan Caldwell didn't feel like the leader of a global empire. He felt like a man who had been complicit not by action, but by inaction. And now, the cost had come due. Because Amara's act wasn't just about spilled coffee. It was a reckoning. And it had started the moment he looked away from the truth. The knock on Amara's door came just after 6 p.m. She wasn't expecting anyone. Her shift had ended in chaos the night before, and she'd spent most of today ignoring phone calls, deleting texts, and refusing to look at her social media feed. She didn't need to see the headlines. She already knew what they'd say. When she peeked through the blinds of her tiny South Dallas apartment, her breath caught. It was him, Ethan Caldwell. Standing alone, no driver, no assistant, no camera crew. Just Ethan, holding a manila folder in one hand and something else in the other, takeout from a soul food joint just around the corner. Amara opened the door slowly, unsure if she was ready. But he didn't speak right away. He just looked at her. And for once, he didn't have the eyes of a man used to being listened to. He had the eyes of someone asking for permission to speak. "Can I come in?" he asked quietly. She hesitated, then stepped aside. The apartment was small but clean. A worn-out couch, second-hand coffee table, a few framed photos of her and Rhea. Ethan glanced at them briefly but didn't comment. He handed her the folder first. "I found this last night," he said. "You deserve to see it." Inside were the files, the crash report, the internal memos, the resignation letter from Marcus Hale. Amara's hands trembled as she flipped through each page. Proof, cold, printed proof. She sat down slowly, her knees weak, her voice barely above a whisper. "You knew." "I didn't," he replied. "Not really, but I should have, and that's on me." Amara looked at him, unsure whether to scream or cry. Ethan sat across from her, setting the takeout on the table like it was some kind of offering. He didn't speak for a long moment. Then finally, he said, "I don't expect forgiveness, but I needed to see you, to tell you I see you now." Her laugh was bitter. "Now?" He nodded. "Yeah, I know how hollow that sounds. I had to face you. Not in a press release, not in a courtroom. Here, where the truth actually matters." She stared at him, searching for the catch, the lie, the PR angle. But he didn't blink. "Why now?" she asked. "Because yesterday, "You did what no one in my world ever does," he said. "You told the truth, not with words, with action." And it shook me. Amara didn't respond, but for the first time in years, her shoulders eased, just a little. She wasn't sure where this was going, whether it would fix anything, whether it could. But for the first time, someone had knocked on her door. Not to silence her, but to listen. The video hit the internet like a spark to gasoline. By noon the next day, it had already racked up over 2 million views across every major platform. The moment Amara poured the coffee, the way she locked eyes with Ethan, and his frozen, silent reaction, it was replayed, slowed down, analyzed from every angle. People weren't just watching it. They were feeling it. Some called it assault, others called it justice, but most agreed it was a moment of raw, unfiltered truth in a world full of polished lies. The hashtags took off. Number justice for Amara. Number Rhea deserved more. Number Black Stories Matter. Number the silence of power. Morning shows picked it up. Late-night hosts slipped it into monologues. Think pieces filled online columns, some praising Amara for her bravery, others asking what kind of pain drives a woman to spill coffee on a billionaire in front of 100 cameras. But the real storm was inside Caldwell Holdings. The board called an emergency meeting. Investors were panicking. Stock took a hit within hours, and buried deep inside the media frenzy came a quiet, damning headline. Fatal crash, linked to Caldwell's subsidiary, reopened after viral incident. The press had found the file Ethan uncovered. Whether it was leaked or discovered independently didn't matter. The public now had names, dates, and proof that something had been hidden. Reporters camped outside Amara's apartment. News vans rolled through South Dallas like they had never seen that part of town before. She didn't answer the door. She didn't speak to the cameras. But her silence only made her voice louder. Meanwhile, Ethan faced the music. He stood behind a podium 3 days later, this time not in a tuxedo, not in a ballroom, but in front of reporters and a sea of microphones. "I failed," he said, "not just as a CEO, but as a human being. I let a system protect my name at the cost of someone else's life. And I watched a young woman carry that pain into a room where she wasn't welcome because we refused to hear her anywhere else." Some praised the statement, others called it performative, but Ethan didn't back down. He ordered an internal audit, opened the books, invited civil rights organizations to investigate hiring practices, misconduct complaints, and workplace culture. He also made one request: that Amara be given the choice to speak on her terms, and she did. But not in front of reporters, not in a studio. She chose a community center. One microphone, one folding chair, and a room full of neighbors who had watched her grow up. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Because when truth is undeniable, it doesn't have to shout. It just has to be heard. The folding chair creaked slightly beneath Amara as she sat facing a room of familiar faces, neighbors, teachers, childhood friends, a few people she hadn't seen since high school. There were no television cameras, no branded backdrops, just a single mic and the truth she had carried for years. When she finally spoke, it wasn't with the fire people expected. It was with something far heavier. "Sometimes, the hardest part isn't the insult," she began, voice steady. "It's the silence that follows, the looks that say, just ignore it, keep working, be grateful you're even here." She spoke about Rhea not as a symbol, but as a sister, a person, someone who believed her voice mattered, even when the world told her it didn't. She spoke about being followed around in stores, being told to smile more at work, being looked through at events like she was part of the furniture. And then she said something that made the room fall even quieter. "I didn't pour coffee to make a scene," Amara said. "I did it because I realized I'd been waiting for someone else to do the right thing for too long." That line, just that, was clipped and shared by millions within hours. The ripple effect was immediate. Caldwell Holdings announced a public reparation initiative focused on marginalized communities affected by corporate negligence. They pledged funds not in hush money, but in accountability scholarships in Rhea's name, an independent ethics committee, and a promise to restructure from the top down. But even more powerful than the policy shifts was the cultural one. Employees, especially black women from across the country, began sharing their own stories under the tag number "Not Your Decoration." Servers, assistants, interns, women who had been objectified, silenced, passed over, or forced to smile through humiliation. Amara's moment gave theirs a voice. As for Ethan Caldwell, he didn't disappear. He showed up. Not as a hero, not as a martyr, but as a man learning how to unlearn. He stepped down from day-to-day operations and took on a new role, building partnerships with organizations focused on workplace justice and corporate accountability. Not in front of cameras, not for headlines, but because the cost of doing nothing had finally hit home. Amara, meanwhile, founded a nonprofit called The Young Project, dedicated to giving underrepresented voices platforms to speak on their own terms. She didn't want fame. She wanted change. And slowly, it started to happen. Because when one woman breaks the silence, she doesn't just shatter walls, she opens doors. For years, Rhea Young had existed only in memory. There were no vigils, no headlines, no lawsuits, just a police report, a closed case file, and a grieving family left with questions that no one ever seemed in a hurry to answer. But now, thanks to Amara's courage and the firestorm that followed, Rhea's name was finally being spoken again. This time, not as a statistic, but as a life that mattered. Within 2 weeks of the media exposure, the district attorney's office reopened the investigation into Rhea's death. Public pressure was undeniable. Civil rights groups were demanding transparency. And the evidence, once buried beneath bureaucracy, now had light. New forensic analysis of the crash site confirmed what Amara had always believed: the impact came from behind, consistent with a forced swerve. Security footage from a nearby gas station, long ignored, showed a black SUV matching the company's fleet heading toward the exit ramp just minutes before the time of the crash. The driver? Marcus Hale. The same man who had resigned quietly after the incident. He was located in Arizona, living under a different name, working a cash-only job at a construction site. When questioned, he broke. It didn't take long. Years of hiding had eaten at him. He admitted that he had been drinking that night, and though he hadn't meant to cause the crash, he panicked when he realized someone had died. He was afraid of jail, of losing everything, and the company lawyers had offered him an easy way out. Silence in exchange for freedom. That silence ended now. Marcus Hale was arrested and charged with vehicular manslaughter and obstruction of justice. The trial was public, the testimony painful, but for the Young family, it was something they had never been given before: truth. Ethan Caldwell attended every day of the trial, not as a company representative, but as a man sitting in the back row, listening. He didn't try to speak. He didn't try to control the narrative. He just showed up. And when the verdict came down, guilty Amara sat with her mother, hand in hand, as tears rolled silently down their faces. Not tears of joy, not exactly, but of weight finally lifted. The court also ruled that Caldwell Holdings would pay restitution to Rhea's family not as hush money, but as part of a civil settlement acknowledging corporate negligence. The funds were directed toward the Young Project, where Amara used them to create scholarships for young black women pursuing law and social justice. Rhea's story wasn't just reopened. It was rewritten. With her name on the plaque above the scholarship fund, her face on the mural painted in the community center, her voice echoed in every woman who now had the courage to speak. Justice didn't bring Rhea back, but it made sure she was never erased again. Amara never wanted to be a symbol. She didn't wake up one morning hoping to spark a movement or shake a billion-dollar corporation. She was a woman grieving her sister, working quietly, enduring silently, and waiting, hoping that someday, someone would care enough to ask why her pain had been ignored. That someday never came. So she made it happen. The world watched her pour coffee on a CEO. But what they didn't see was everything that came before the years of being unseen, unheard, and underestimated. What they didn't hear were the voices she carried with her: her mother's quiet strength, her sister's fire, the countless others who never got a chance to speak. The lesson here isn't about revenge. It's about visibility. About what happens when someone refuses to stay silent in a world that thrives on their silence. Amara didn't change the world with a speech. She changed it by daring to say, in her own way, enough. And maybe that's all courage really is, taking a stand when you have every reason to sit down. Today, Amara continues to run the Young Project, now expanded to several cities, giving space for stories like hers to rise without fear, without shame. She's still soft-spoken, still smiles with grace. But now, when she walks into a room, people look up and listen. As for Ethan Caldwell, he no longer leads a company, but he does something far more difficult. He listens, he learns, and he shows up. Because change isn't a moment, it's a practice. And in case no one's told you this lately, your story matters. Your voice matters. You don't have to be loud to be heard. You just have to be brave enough to speak. If this story moved you, if you saw a part of yourself, your sister, your friend, your past, don't let it stop at the screen. Share it. Talk about it. Let it remind you that behind every calm face might be a story the world hasn't heard yet but desperately needs to. This is Hidden Worth, where we uncover the value behind the silence. And if you're still with us, you're part of that change.